Episode 7 of The Amazing Digital Circus was exciting, shocking, and depressing. And what better way to cope during the holiday season than by building a fully edible model of the Warrig syrup tanker from Episode 2? This is a project I have wanted to do for quite a while since Episode 2 was released, but it was no easy task. Throughout the process, I quickly learned there would be several challenges, and the result you see took weeks to make and buy all the components for. If you want to help me with future projects that are more difficult than this, please consider subscribing. I started by identifying as many parts of the rig as I could to source for real-life candy counterparts to them. My initial plan was to build the war rig out of gingerbread. In the episode, this is what most of the cab appears to be built out of, and this would also allow for the inside to be hollow and have room for interior details. However, when searching for guides, I realized there weren't very many examples of gingerbread big rigs I could follow. I had also made a few crafts with it in the past, and I knew it could be a bit of a pain to work with. I decided to instead cut the cab out of solid blocks of cake, which would be easier to assemble and connect than gingerbread panels. There are also a lot more cake trucks than gingerbread trucks that I could use as references. Using Rhinoceros, a CAD program designed for drafting, I traced simple shapes onto an image of the war rig. There are no clear head-on views of the truck in the show, so to estimate its front-facing proportions, I traced a drawing of a Freightliner 122, the real truck the war rig looks like it's based on. I organized the individual pieces into an 8x12-inch cake pan. Then, I reorganized them into a 4x8-inch cake pan when I realized I would be wasting a lot of cake if I used the former. We have HEB brand pound cake mix. And allegedly all we have to do is add eggs and milk to this and it will work. I decided to bake pound cake because I hoped its density would make the cab parts stronger and more rigid. The war rig's nose looks like it's made of pink layer cake, so I dyed the batter with some red food coloring gel before baking it. Alright. I am hoping that this will rise. I baked 2 pound cakes in case something went wrong with the part I was cutting. It was a good thing I did this because I ended up needing to scale up all the pieces due to an issue with the decorations. I could not have cut all the parts out of one cake. I initially tried to make cut guides in the cake by poking holes through the templates I made. But I couldn't see any of them, so I just cut out the templates and cut around them. I feel like I'm shaving ham. Okay, the truck cab is beginning to take shape already. I have the foundation it rests on down, and I have some of the cab formed. I think I'm going to use my other cake to cut another one of these squares out, and a bit more of the cab out. To put together the pieces, I used royal icing. Royal icing, like superglue, is applied as a thick liquid, but dries solid. You can buy packs and tubes of this, but because I needed a lot, I decided to mix my own with confectioner's sugar and meringue powder. I also pinned some parts together with broken bamboo sticks to keep them in place while the icing was drying. These are the only inedible parts of the cab. To cover the parts of the rig that aren't supposed to be pink, I used fondant. Eat up. To make the gingerbready texture around the truck's cab and sleeper compartment, I mixed chocolate and vanilla fondant together like how one would with modeling clay or Play-Doh. This created a light brown coloration that contrasted with the dark brown color of the chocolate fondant. I understand that fondant is a little controversial among bakers, and it is true that it doesn't have the greatest taste. However, it was the best material for my decoration needs because it could be easily flattened, shaped, and cut into smooth, precise parts. Before you can attach fondant to a cake, you must ice the cake so that the fondant sticks. The royal icing I was using had become a little too chunky to work effectively, so I made another batch with a runnier consistency, which was both stickier and easier to spread. As you can see in the footage, they adhere straight onto the cake afterwards. To make the waffle cone texture on the truck's doors and grill, I pressed a meat tenderizer into the pieces. The chocolate bar-shaped panels along the sleeper compartment are pieces of fondant with grooves scratched into them, and I curled the ends of fondant strips to make the tusk-shaped rails on the grill. I unfortunately had to do some maintenance on the cap before I could start adding candy. The sleeper compartment had begun to fall apart along its seam, so I had to reapply icing and add some more bamboo sticks to keep it together. One of the door panels had also begun to sweat, or become soggy with condensation, and was sliding off. I recut it from a thicker sheet of fondant. I also cut a new windshield because I thought the previous one was too narrow. To prevent fondant decorations from sliding off again, I decided to first add the steps and gas tanks underneath the cab to hold them up. These are made out of chalky-looking rectangular candies in the show, but through all my research and Googling, I could not figure out what type of candy these were supposed to be. In their place, I used Andes mints, which were about the right size and shape, and coated them in colored icing. If you know what the name of the rectangular candies in the show are, tell me in the comments because I could not find anything that remotely resembled them. The icing I used is just some more royal icing I set aside and added food coloring to. I did not color the mints used to make the steps because I wanted to get them under the doors as quickly as possible. It seemed a little counterintuitive to recolor them anyway, because they already are mostly brown. I made the smokestacks by cutting a rolled wafer cookie in half, added a candy cane to the front of the truck to replicate the stripe it has down its hood, and added the pink icing trim around the grill with a piping bag. To make the front wheels and tag wheels, I formed some vanilla fondant into puck shapes and then made a divot in the center to insert a snow-capped gumdrop. I think the wheels are supposed to be lifesavers in the episode, but I don't think lifesavers make any plain candies large enough for the scale I was working in. The War Rig's back tires are French macaron pastries. So I bought a dozen macarons, 10 for the total number of tires on the rig, plus 2 extra. This was the most expensive part of the project, with all 12 costing almost $30. It was worth it though, because they looked really nice once attached. You may recall earlier how I said I had to scale up the cab. This was the reason why. I had believed that the supermarket macarons I was buying would be relatively small and made them an inch in diameter in my CAD drawings. Unfortunately, the macarons I had bought turned out to be over 1.5 inches in diameter, so I had to make everything else larger to compensate. To make the headlights, I just made a strip of pink royal icing, let it harden, and cut it into squares. Lastly, I attached the candy corn spikes to the wheel wells. I attempted to put 3 pieces of candy corn on each wheel well. Unfortunately, I couldn't get all 3 to stay on. There are now 4 total of the entire bag that I bought. And I don't like candy corn that much, so that kind of sucks. With the cab of the rig nearly completed, it was time to work on the tanker. In the show, the syrup tanker looks like a giant Little Debbie cake roll, but if you were to put several of these together end to end, you get a pencil-thin tank that wouldn't look very convincing. To make the tank more substantial, I decided to use a nut roll, a type of Slavic pastry filled with chocolate pecan paste. Conveniently, my mom makes a bunch of nut rolls every Christmas, so I was able to pick one out of a large batch she was baking.
How round is it possible to get this?
You can get it pretty tight.
That's pretty good.
The crust is very smooth and has a dark sheen like the syrup tank. To make the chocolate glaze on top of the tank, I masked off the sides of the nut roll with foil, melted some chocolate dots, and poured them on top of the roll. To make the piping that runs along the side of the trailer, I cut up some different colored candy canes and attached them with more royal icing. To cut the candy canes without shattering them, I heated up a kitchen knife over a stovetop and slowly worked it through the canes. You should do this with a very inexpensive knife because you can damage it, or in my case, sugar will caramelize and harden on the blade. I had bought 2 gourmet lollipops to represent those on either end of the tanker in the episode, and my hope was that after cutting down their stick lengths, they would act as connection points between the cab and tank. This meant I needed to attach the lollipops before assembling the trailer and let the icing dry while the roll was upside down. I made the connection points to the cab and back wheels with a drill, which may have been a little bit excessive, but I needed clean, round holes the lollipop sticks could easily slide into. You could say it was just an excuse for me to use an industrial power tool while confectioning, and you might be right, but how many other bakers can say that they've even had the opportunity? Unfortunately, though, my plan to attach the tank didn't work at all. The roll was too heavy for the icing to support its weight, so I had to make the stand out of some toy blocks wrapped in parchment paper. If I had planned to support the tank from below in advance, I could have made this stand out of cake and decorated it to look like the trailer's undercarriage. However, I needed the truck ready to be filmed within the hour, so I left it as it was. The tanker is a little shorter than it is supposed to be, partly because I had to make the cab larger. To prevent the trailer from looking squashed, I took some artistic liberties and staggered the tank inward from the wheelbase. In real life, this configuration is more common for dry bulk tankers, but it is familiar enough of a layout that it makes the trailer look more convincing. All that was left to do now was to put the finishing touches on the cab. And there you have it. That is how I made a somewhat screen-accurate and 90% edible candy war rig from the amazing digital circus. The final model is just under 2 feet or 30 centimeters long. It doesn't fit on my scale, but I estimate it weighs about 1.5 pounds. Even though some of the details started to sag during the film shoot, its presence remained impressive. It towers over some real model trucks I have. Even my cat approved of it, despite the fact that he's never watched the show. If nothing else, I hope you've enjoyed watching this creation as it took shape and my successes and struggles throughout the process. It is probably possible to make a more screen-accurate and cleaner-looking candy carrier than I have, but I'm not a baking connoisseur. I just wanted to see if it could be done since I had never seen it attempted before. I still got to make a cool and original piece of fan art in the process, and if one of you thinks you can improve upon it, I encourage you to do so. You may use this video as a guide, and I will link the recipes I used in the description. Thank you for watching.